So I'm going to sum up a little bit about what we talked about last week, because there's two different roads that you see Christ kind of walk through. And the first one was Jerusalem. We talked about that, the road home. For the Israelite people, Jerusalem, the idea of Jerusalem was always the place of home. It was the place of wholeness. And so Jesus walks toward Jerusalem. The first 70% of the story is Jesus walking, making his way back to Jerusalem, where there's going to be suffering, right? And so the path home, the path toward wholeness, often it involves suffering and learning to embody love. And when I say suffering, I thought about this, Steve. Suffering, the way to grow is to be challenged. Oftentimes there's conflict involved. There's uncomfortable. So you could change out that word suffering sometimes for conflict, disruption, those kind of things. That's the way that we grow, is we have things challenged and we have to learn from them. So suffering, synonymous with many of those things. When we look at the Christ path, there is suffering, obviously. And so we talked about how Jesus embodies Israel, right? So Israel, they were in Egypt, and they were in captivity, and there was brokenness, there was death, and they had to learn to walk away from it. Remember when I talked about 40 years? I said this last week, I'll say it again. It takes, if you were to walk from Egypt to Canaan, it would take you 15 days. The amount of Israelites that moved in the story, if again, you take that number literally, you could have them stand next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, all the way to Canaan in a quarter of the way back. So if someone were to say it took you a year, you would look at that person and say, are you blind? Like, does your Google Maps not work? What's going on? Oh, you were using Apple Maps. Got it. Okay. That makes sense. 40 years would have that number taken very literally would have been kind of laughable. The number 40 to the Hebrews is synonymous with growth, change, suffering, trials, learning, and unlearning. And so Israel, in order to get to the promised land, here's the deeper idea behind this. You have to learn and unlearn certain things. And that process is really easy, right? It's really simple. When someone calls into question something you've really believed, super simple. You just walk away, you're like, done? I agree. Yeah, not easy. When someone challenges something, or when there's pain, where there's suffering, whatever it is, it's hard and it's not easy. It's a trial. And so again, Jesus walked in the wilderness, right? Wilderness, desert for 40 days. There's a reason this number 40 keeps coming up. It's the road of suffering, pain. We move through it. And so for Israel, we see this in every story. We have a picture of Jonah, the actual picture of him right there, it looks like. I know. I found that. I was really excited. So again, the story of Jonah, he goes down in the belly of the whale before he can get to where he needs to be in Nineveh, share the message, and go back home, right? He gets swallowed by a whale. He's taken down to the depths. The word is he goes down to Sheol. And again, I'm just kind of recapping real quick. Sheol, the word means death. So take this story very literally. The felt board should say Jonah died, right? There's a deeper picture here, though. Don't miss it. In order for Jonah to be the embodiment of love and share forgiveness with the people of Nineveh, he has to die to certain things. He has to allow some things to die, unlearn certain things before he can actually share something powerful with a group of people. That's what happens with Jonah. And Christ, obviously, is the embodiment of this. And so he says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. How many of you have heard this quote? We've heard this over and over again. Many people will often use this as a way to say, see, so Muslims and Hindus, they're all wrong. We're right. Jesus is the way. You're wrong. How convenient, right? The beauty of this verse, again, is the way, the truth, and the life these were the words that the Jews used for Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Genesis, Exodus, I almost said Matthew, think of the new. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the way, the truth, and the life. Another word for Torah was the way home. Come on, somebody. So you want to find fullness, you want to experience the way home? Look at the picture the life of Christ, the life and death of Christ. Look at that. You will find the way home. Is the way of Christ easy? No, but it's the way home. It's the way toward wholeness, life more abundantly. We talked last week, too, about finding self, finding who you are. When I ask you, who are you? The answer is going to be what? I'm the third boy in this. Nice, good. I am a lawyer. I am a this. I'm the son or daughter of this person. Is that really who you are? No, those are just labels that have been attached to you. When you take your picture and post it on social media, you've obviously taken a couple because you had a double chin on the one. You get the right mode, you get the right thing, and you want everyone to believe what they think of you is true of what you think of yourself, and before you know it, you have this weird picture of a person that's not really you. Who are you? The only way to find who you are is not to read a bunch of self-help books. It's to slowly strip away what you're not. And so we talked about this sculpture, the David, right? And how he said, the sculptor says, the image was there. I just had to strip away all that it wasn't. And before you know it, that's when David appears. And that's for you and me. Strip away the things you're not. And before you know it, the image appears of who you are. So we talked about that. The stripping away is not easy. It's painful. Sometimes it involves some death to certain things. That's the picture that we talked about last week. It's pain, it's suffering, it's conflict, it's all of that. We learn to die to the old. And then here's another thing we talked about last week, which was really painful and awkward for some of us. We talked about how everyone is a teacher. I know. Yeah, that's right. Anyone can do your job. You're just a glorified babysitter, yeah. Man, did I hear that a million times when I was a teacher. Here's what I mean by that. Everyone has wisdom they can share with you. Everyone can help you grow. And I even brought up a certain person, her name starts with a J, that I had to deal with at a certain group. And I said even she was a teacher, because she taught me, the reactions I had from her taught me a lot of interesting things about myself. And I had to start to kind of deal with some of that. Everyone is a teacher in the process of whittling away who you are and who you are not. And this road toward wholeness, again, painful, but so beautiful. And so today, we're going to talk about a really weird story. It's the road to Emmaus. And in this story, this is what basically takes place. Israel, Jerusalem, just saw Jesus murdered on a cross. People don't like it. I'm going to say this too. People don't like it when I use the word murder. But let me just put this through your eyes if you were a first century person. Here's a guy who's talking about life more abundantly. He's going against the grain. He's sharing messages that are potentially threatening to the empire of Rome. He's doing all of this. And so against his will, he didn't go and say, hey, take me. No, they went to him. They grabbed him. Did he fight against them? No. But they took him and they murder him. They kill him on a cross. That's why I use the word murder, because it's unjust. It's not just. It goes against the grain of justice. So all these people, they watched as Jesus was murdered. The very picture of what they felt Israel was being called to be. We're called to be a suffering servant, to recycle hate with love. That's what Israel was feeling called to do. And so these men, they're walking away from Jerusalem. Did you pick up that word there? They're walking away from Jerusalem. And on the way away from Jerusalem, there's an interesting individual who shows up and starts walking with them. And the story goes, this was Jesus. And Jesus somehow, I don't know, he camouflages himself. He puts on a mask. He does something. They don't recognize him, even though they were just watching him crucified the other night, right? People get all caught up, and is this literal or not? And they start arguing. Here's what I say to that again. What's the meaning? What was the point of this? Because they told the story. Why would they tell the story of these two men? Here's why. There's something really profound that Israel needs to hear about their story. Have you ever lost someone? What do you do after a loss? That's the question. What do? Do you grow from it? Or do you sit with it? Are you angry? Do you never move on past it? What do? This is what the Jewish people, the Christ followers, are faced with. What do we do? That was the question they had. Everyone get it so far? Good. So here we go. The road to Emmaus. The road to Emmaus is basically you have stepped out of the fishbowl and you're looking around. And you just had a moment of, Because the road to Emmaus, these two men are going to have a moment of, oh. You guys got that? Like the moment where you're like, I didn't see that coming. That hit me. I was at Knott's Berry Park the other day. This dad was trying to win a prize for his son. And it's, of course, those huge, stuffed animals. So he's trying. He must have spent like $50 on a $10 stuffed animal. And it's 90 plus degrees. You guys were in the heat, 90 plus degrees. Dude wins. He wins. He's a winner. He wins the prize. And I see him an hour later just hefting this thing all over the park, sweat dripping. And I thought, you won, but you lost. Winner, but a loser. And what a moment of awakening, right? We have these moments. I won. I lost. We win the lottery. You win all this money, and then the government says, I'll take 40%. And then you have friends who are all of a sudden like, hey, bro, I could use some money. And you have friends and enemies, false friends, and before you know it, you have $10 left. And you're like, what did I do with all my money? Right? You win, but you lose. You have a moment of awareness. You learned something. I know different people going through these moments where they broke up with someone. A friend of mine just told me yesterday that they've been with their partner for like a year and a half, and they just broke up with them. And they said it was painful, it was hard. But she also said, I feel like the world's kind of opened up to me, and I'm not sure what to do with it. There's like all this freedom to like, I have a weekend free, what do I do with it? All of these things all of a sudden opened up for this person, and now what, right? You had the moment of awareness, now what? And so with your groups right now, this is what I want you to do. When the moment of awareness comes, how did it show up? So here's what you'll do in your groups. Are you someone that learns better from experience? Like, I have to screw up on my own. I have to go through the thing on my own. Or are you someone that will listen to the words of wisdom or advice from others? What kind of person are you? How do you learn best? Do you have to make the mistake, or do you learn from others? Explain this to your group. And if you want to share a moment or an experience, that's great too, but you don't have to. But just talk about that for a moment. Why is it that you are drawn to learning this way over that? All right, hit it. Go for it. So out of curiosity, raise your hand. Raise your hand if you are someone who learns better from experience. Raise your hand if that's you. The big stuff, okay. So for the big stuff, you're like, experience, just gonna do it myself. Got it. How about, so on the flip side of it, you like to hear the wisdom words and you learn from other people's experience. Is that you? Okay. Got it. Isn't that funny that like you just kind of know most people are going to learn this way? Growing up, I remember my parents often, don't do that. When it came as a don't do, most of us were like, well, I'm going to do it. But when it came from someone that was wise enough to say, you could do that, and potentially that could happen, or you could choose this. Here's my story. A little more open to it. Still probably going to do my own thing. Probably still going to touch the frying pan, yeah. But it's interesting. We all learn in kind of different ways. We all respond to different things differently too, right? Fascinating, and somehow we have to learn how to all live together and work together. So here we go. Road to Emmaus. Jesus walks with these two men. These two men are walking. He just shows up. And again, I doubt he'd be the one wearing white. But I think that, the pictures they're trying to show, that would have been Jesus. They didn't recognize him. That's the point, right? They don't know who this is. That's the concept here. And he's about to share something interesting. There's something fascinating to this story I want to unwrap with you. And we have to unwrap it because we're not Jewish, first off. At least I don't think there's anyone that's Jewish in this room. Yeah, okay, good. Not good, you know what I mean. No Jews! Ethos, no Jews! I love that this is being recorded now. You're right, exactly. Oh, radically accepting. Yeah, baloney. So we're not Jewish. We don't live in the first century. And so when you read this, you're going to miss some things. But if you are part of that culture, you're there in the first century, you're Jewish, you're going to pick up some things. And so I want to share with you from that viewpoint what this would have meant to you. Because again, it's not just some story that, oh yeah, here's what we remember. It was, this is what we need. And so we shared this story as well. So here we go. Luke 24, 13 through 15 says this. Now that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. Again, remember, they're including certain things for a reason. And this is not decoding, by the way. This is not like me going through and like, look for the special decoder ring or this or that. These are just words and phrases that meant something to a people. If we talked about an elephant and a donkey today, you would immediately think of 2 different parties, right? For them, you bring up certain words, certain numbers, certain things. It meant something to them. And so they were talking with each other about everything that had happened as they talked and discussed these things with each other. So watch this. Concepts I want you to know. The name Emmaus, it means a place of safety. Do you guys get it? It's a place where you go when you're feeling scared. It's a place of safety. This is not a place of disruption. It's a place where you go to relax and avoid things. That's the deeper Hebraic concept behind Emmaus. And notice the number 7 again. Why is it really 7 miles? It's actually not. Did those people make a mistake when they wrote this? Well, I'll tell you, one of the ideas is that they wrote 7 because 7 means something. It's a complete concept. You have complete safety there. That's the big picture there. Because again, the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus, it would have taken you about an hour. And they talked about everything. They were reflecting over the events that happened. So now think about Israel. You go into captivity. You're wandering for 40 years. You are thinking over, you're reflecting over what happened. And there's sometimes moments where we grumble. Do you remember there's this picture of Israel? They go into the wilderness. They're out of captivity, out of slavery, and what do? They start grumbling. It might have been easier. We're at least familiar with, what Egypt had. So why don't we just go back there? At least we could eat. This is what they said. If only we could die. They're out of slavery. They forgot what slavery was like. If only we just die. And then they say this, at least there we had pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us into the desert, right? Because at least we were familiar with that suffering. And so here's the thing. Sorry, I skipped ahead. When you and I have that moment where we have a moment of awareness, when something opens up to us, when someone challenges us with something and we see it, there's a very real moment where you're tempted to go back to what you knew. You go back to what's familiar. Because some of us, we don't want to deal with it, do we? If you go back to what's familiar, then you don't actually have to grow. Keith and I were talking about this. With any 12-step program, there's always the very real fear that you will at some point be tempted to pick up that bottle again. Even though I'm experiencing so much pain, but I've experienced so much freedom, there's still a moment where I say, yeah, but this feels familiar. This feels safe. And even though I know it doesn't really bring life, if I go back, it'll at least bring me a sense of familiarity. I'm at least comfortable with that pain. It's predictable. Yeah, that thing's going to give you exactly what it's always given you. So at least I know what it's going to give me. People will go back to destructive relationships and we'll say, that's stupid, that's crazy. We'll call them nuts, right? But most of the time, it's because they're on their own. They're looking around, and now they're saying, I'm a bit nervous. What do I do? And they will go back to that husband or that wife that was completely toxic to them. But the thing for them is they went back because they knew what to expect. At least there I know he's going to hit me. At least there I know she's going to say certain things to me that are going to tear me down. Right? It's familiar. It's what I expect. You'll go back to a organization, a group, a system. Even though it doesn't work, it's safe. It's what you've known. And you'll go back because there's safety there. There's familiarity there. What happens when you go back to a place of familiarity, a place where it's safe? What you're essentially doing is you're not growing. You've just caused yourself to not have to deal with the thing. Ever have an issue with a person? You have this? No. Nope, never. I'm at peace with everyone. Which essentially you just said you're on drugs. You have an issue with a person, and the best thing for some people to do is just to avoid it, right? Avoid the thing. Don't deal with the thing. Just ignore the thing, and maybe it'll go away. Don't have the difficult conversation. Don't ask the question of the person. Avoid it, because at least there's safety there. You can stay in your thing, your bubble, and not have to deal with the thing, right? And so we get to this place. For them, understand, these two people walking the road towards safety, they just experienced an aha moment, an awakening, a moment where everything kind of fell apart and they had to shift how they viewed what they were called to be. They were not called to be another Rome. They felt called to be a suffering servant, a group of people who, in the midst of brokenness and pain, they recycled hate with love. That's what they felt they were going to be called to do, but it was such a shift. And some of them said, I can't do this. Do you ever wonder why Jesus says, look, this thing is not for everybody? This thing's not for everybody. It's not going to work for everybody. Because if it was safe and it was familiar, everybody would do it. Right? That's why he says, some of you, you're going to leave your family. You're going to leave your jobs. You're going to leave certain things because it's leaving the familiar. And so these guys, in the midst of all of this, they essentially said, we're going back to where it's safe. We're going back to where it's familiar because we don't have to deal with the issue, the thing. We don't have to embrace it. And science calls this fight or flight. We get to this point where your reptilian brain, right? It says, oh no, I'm in uncomfort, and so I'm going to either run or I'm going to deal with it. Running kind of feels good until you stop running, and usually the thing catches up to you at some point. You're never going to outrun the beast, are you? It's going to catch you, so good luck running. Yeah, and some of us, we just run in circles until we die. Stand and fight, maybe you got a chance. But that's just the scientific way of approaching it. It's what we do. So for Israel, again, the question was, what do we do with this thing? Jesus just blew it up. And what he did, essentially, is he just showed exactly what Israel's story was all along. In the midst of captivity, brokenness, pain, after you've gone through the suffering, there's something beautiful here to be learned. Will you learn it, or you go back to the same cycle again? What will you do? Jesus said this to these men, because the men, they said, you didn't know the story to this man who's walking with them? And so Jesus says, no, tell me what happened. So they share exactly to Jesus what happened to Jesus, which is, that's kind of funny. Tell me my story, right? Have you ever had people relay back to you your story? It's so funny. You're like, oh, is that how you perceived that just went? Sometimes it's frustrating. You want to be like, actually? Yeah, you would be like, actually. I even had someone once in the last couple of months, they said, hey, did you hear about that heretic that left the Adventist church, did this and this and this? I was like, oh, tell me more. So funny. Like, oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. Interesting to hear your own story reflected back. Jesus hears his own story reflected back. And what he does here is he responds. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter into his glory? And this concept, glory here, what this means is into the fullness, something revealed fully. So this Jerusalem path, it reveals something fully. The path of suffering, pain, brokenness, moving through it, learning to embody love, it's going to reveal some interesting things about you, your community, your job, your coworkers, your family. It's going to reveal some interesting things. Now, here's something kind of funny that I love to show people. I often grew up with this. Whenever people talked about this, they'd point out that Jesus says, and beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. And I remember hearing people say, oh, I wish I had been there. He must have shared, he must have pulled out the decoder ring. He must have shown all the secrets, all the crazy things that happened and this and that. And I used to think, yeah, that's too bad that he couldn't have shared it with us too, right? Here's what this means, though, from a Hebraic perspective. When he says, I showed them Moses, first of all, the glory, right? The fulfillment of the whole thing, of what Israel's called to be. He shows them what Israel's called to be from the beginning. Genesis, the stories of Moses, right? All the way through the prophets. These are all books. So what Jesus is essentially doing is this. He's saying, this thing that happened, this suffering servant motif, you are Israel, a suffering servant, broken, beaten, despised, and yet you're called to return it with love. Every single one of these stories has that in it. And just look at it here. That's what this means for anyone at that time era reading that. It wasn't some secret that you'll never be in on. It was just basically a way that they viewed how to read the Bible, the Torah. Anyone have an interesting moment with that just now? We didn't have to use a decoder ring, did we? It was kind of fun. Cool. Okay. So Jesus is the picture of Israel. The Christ message is the message of Torah over and over and over again. When you are in captivity, the way to get home is to learn how to live and thrive in captivity. Learn how to grow from the brokenness, not just turn around and create more brokenness yourself. Not turn and hit their cheek, right? Turn the other cheek. That's the concept there. And the Christ message is really a beautiful one. I like when Jesus says this, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. Other empires kill, steal, destroy. That land looks nice, I'll take it. Those resources look really good. I think I'll take those too. This is what beastly empire does. This is what they were used to with Rome. Rome said, I see it, I want it, I'll take it. Israel says, that's not what we see ourselves. We see ourselves having life more abundantly to its fullest, and it doesn't happen at the end of a sword. It happens by saying the phrase, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Recycling hate with love. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes before the Father but through me. I was with some people, this is almost 10 years ago, and we were talking about different religious systems, and I remember talking about Gandhi. And I remember hearing the comment about Gandhi, and it rubbed me the wrong way even 10 years ago, because I said, Gandhi was so great, wasn't he? And they said, yeah, but he wasn't Christian. And I remember but wasn't he great? Didn't he have a really good message? Yeah, but he's going to hell. I was like, Gandhi? If Gandhi's going to hell, I am screwed. Oh man, Gandhi's going to hell? Really? Again, you know this. And so I remember looking at Gandhi and thinking, is there anyone in that era, in that time period, in that space geologically that embodied the Christ message more? Doubt it. Martin Luther King Jr. Again, yeah, we can look at, anytime you look at a person and you begin to like dig in deep enough into their emails and everything, you might find some stuff. He embodies this message. He brings it forward, right? It's beautiful. Alan Watts, he's this great philosopher. And what he did was really controversial in the 70s. He said Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, they all have an interesting thread that connects all of them. And he said the thread is the message of the Christ. He said it's this interesting red thread that you can find if you look deep enough. He said we're used to looking for enemies. We should be looking for friends. So he said every single one of these religious systems, they have an interesting connection, a thread, that actually you can find connection with people. So when you talk to somebody, you don't have to sit there and say, well, you guys believe this, we believe this. You can say, isn't it beautiful that we both see that the world could be a better place? Those are the conversations Alan Watts had. In the 70s, he embodied the Christ message with much of his teachings. Even though, Google him, you'll find he also thought shrooms were involved in this process. But at that point in that time, you'll find interesting things he would say that, again, embody that Christ message. The Buddha, I love that I can talk about this right now. In a normal church, people would be like, "Did you hear that Tony talked about Buddha?" Like, what? The Buddha journey, the journey of this individual Buddha, if you actually read the story, he goes to seek fulfillment, life more abundantly. And he finds that the kingdom of heaven is within. And once we learn to be at peace and love and forgiving one another and learn to walk together with the divine, that's when life opens up. That message sounds familiar, doesn't it? Interestingly enough, Buddha actually says in his message, don't worship me and create idols. Really fascinating, right? Interesting that religions often do this. We'll take something and then we'll completely remove what the actual message was from the beginning. Yeah. Let me keep going. Do you know who this is? The Dalai Lama. DL. Yeah, DL. We're homies. We're tight, me and DL. What a great picture and message of what it looks like to be at one. Great, beautiful message of peace, centeredness, he'd say. Really interesting that he has embodied this picture. He's this beautiful individual. He actually, one of the things he just said not that long ago, he said that the next Dalai Lama is going to be a Western woman. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. I thought, how fascinating. Completely going against the grain of his time to find equality. Something another person did, right? We see Jesus over and over again doing this. And I actually got in a lot of trouble for sharing this picture once. God forbid that we talk about the Pope in a positive way. So beautiful what this man has done. He goes and he publicly wanted to make a statement. So he washed the feet of immigrants. People who from all different cultural backgrounds, religions. He washed the feet, and what he did is he wanted to show them we need to be serving one another, not fighting one another. Not creating more lines of distinction, but actually coming together and serving one another. That was the picture, and that's one of the concepts he continues to bring. And do you know he's not popular right now with his own church? They're actually many people they keep saying, we don't need him here. We need to get a new one. Interesting, right? Almost every one of those individuals, they have things in common. There is a red thread that connects all of them. And I would argue it is the Christ path. It is learning enemy love, nonviolent response, finding self-awareness, bringing the marginalized in. That message, when you get it, it changes everything. And for Israel, for the Jewish people, they had that picture there in Jerusalem. And the picture was so strong, but it was so countercultural to what they were used to. And so what do? How inappropriate that I would have my phone not on vibrate. Um, and so there it is. What do you do with it? Do you turn around and say, not for me? I'm going back to Emmaus. Not for me. I need to go to somewhere more familiar. Not for me. I need this. Because that's too much. What do you do? Yep. Oh, bringing the marginalized in. Not pushing the marginalized out. Anytime there is someone who does not fit, those are the people we need to be seeking most. You know, let me even talk to that. Thank you. That's really good. Now you got me on a tangent. I'm going to do it. I asked my friend if I could even bring this up at some point, so he probably wasn't thinking I was going to say it today, but invited a friend who is an atheist, and he was here, and I asked him to come here, and he said, are you sure? Are you sure? I said, yep. And he was here. And it was interesting because when I asked him what he thought, he said this, lovely people, lovely conversation. A bit churchy. Lovely people, lovely conversation. There's a million Christian churches out there, aren't there? Millions of them. But is there a place where people can find space that is safe no matter what your belief system is? And are you willing to invite them in? And I mean this, inviting them in looks drastically different to some people. Inviting them in is, for some people, just like, hey, welcome, and then never talking to them again. Or are you willing to invite them in, meaning sit, talk, have coffee the next week, invite them to certain things you're doing, a board game night, whatever weird things you people do. Whatever the thing is we do, are you willing to invite them into community? Churches are great at making people feel welcome at the door, but they're also really great at pushing them out afterwards. Communities are great when they bring people in and they thrive and grow together, right? That's what Jesus was speaking of. That's why he eats meals with people. It says he ate with sinners. And when you ate a meal together, what it was saying is, I am one with you. I'm one with you. You're family. Beautiful? Thanks for getting me off track. That was fun, Jason. Life more abundantly happens when we walk with the divine. When we are walking together in these conversations, in these moments of reflection. Life happens when we stop and we say, what did we learn from this thing? What happened there? How do we grow from it? Not ignore it, but how do we grow from it? I hurt your feelings. I'm sorry. What can I do to make it better? What did we both learn from this? Those kind of things. What did we learn? What did we reflect on? So at this moment, I just want to give you like 4 minutes on this one. I want you to think of a person that has modeled that kind of presence of good, life more abundantly, accepting others in. Think of a person in your life who's modeled that for you. What does that person look like? How do they talk, right? I have a friend, Bob, and that is not a generalized, this is an actual person. And Bob was that guy for me in some really interesting stages in my life a couple of years ago. He was constantly the one saying, okay, wait, stop. What's going on? What's the heart of it? He always said the heart of it because he's a hippie. What's the heart of it? What's really going on here? And he always modeled that presence of good, and it caused me to have to reflect on that and kind of bounce it back, echo it back. So Bob, for me, is one of those people. I've got many others right now in my life, but that's just one of them. So talk about that person in your life. Is there someone like that? If there isn't, why, right? All right, go for it. 4 minutes. I'm going to time you. This person you're thinking of, what would it take for you to become that person? Think about that for a moment. Like, what would it take for you to become the kind of person in other people's life to be that model, that presence of life? And again, for me, what has become more and more apparent is the only way for me to truly become that embodiment of love, forgiveness, all of that, is to begin to walk that road a little bit more directly, right through the suffering, to deal with it, to deal with certain things. And again, I think that probably all of us have certain things we need to move through. The walk is with Jesus. I hope you noticed that. For that early group of people, there's a reason they have Jesus right in the middle. There's a reason they tell the story this way. Because they want you to know that in the middle of all the suffering and the pain, don't go back to the old habits. Don't go back to looking for your people to take over, violently overthrow everything so that you can be number one again. Walk the thing differently. Walk it with Christ. That was the concept behind it. When we say something like, "Oh, sweetie, you just need to walk with Jesus." I hear people say really cliche things all the time. That sounds nice, right? Sounds nice. We need more meat. We need to hear more gospel. What do you mean? What does that mean to you, right? Just walk with Jesus. Well, here's what that meant for the early people in the first century. It meant walk like Jesus. It meant walk the path Jesus walked, which was suffering, awareness, change, uncomfortable, growth, loving one another. You've seen beyond the pain, death, the cross. You've died to the old self. Now live it. That's what that meant for them. Today, it's just a simple way to get out of an uncomfortable conversation for some people, right? In order to do that, again, we do many things. We learn, we unlearn. In our culture today, we're told your job will bring you fulfillment. Get the job, right? And you're going to be super happy until it doesn't bring you fulfillment. Am I right? Is everyone in here absolutely, I love my job? Okay, there's a couple of you. Did it bring you ultimate fulfillment in your life? Was it the answer? I'm going to argue it isn't. You gave me an answer I don't like. Maybe it did. For most of us, it didn't. It didn't put all the pieces together. You think being in a relationship is going to fix everything. I will tell you from experience, it's going to make it worse. Not that I don't enjoy being married to my wife, but you're going to have a lot more drama now. Before there was just you. You're a mess. But now you got two messes, right? I know these two are Martha, she's just wait, what? Philip is not perfect and we're not going to... But yeah, you invite someone else into the mess when you get married. The relationship is not the answer to your fulfillment. You're actually going to have to move through a lot of things together once you step into that. Many of us will oftentimes think religion is the answer until it becomes the problem, right? You unlearn and you learn certain things. What do you do when you get to that place? Do you run back to Emmaus or do you dig deep? Do you reflect? Do you learn? How do you learn? It says this, after speaking with Jesus, after hearing the message that, no, don't just go back and repeat the same cycle, Israel. Learn from it. Do what Jesus does. It says they go back to Jerusalem. They go back to the place of suffering. If you're a first century Jew, you're going back to a place where you're potentially going to be murdered. You go back to that. What would enable you to be strong enough now to move through the pain, to move through the uncomfortable? What would it take now to have the difficult conversations, not just avoid it? What will it take? We're going to do a whole series, Soul Renovation. We're going to talk about all of this. Right, Keith?
Absolutely.
Yeah, see?
Get our soul rent on.
That's right. It says they returned to Jerusalem. They went back home. they experience home. Have any of you gone back home after like you feel like you're so much more enlightened than the rest of your family? Anyone like that? Yeah, it's always like the child that comes back home, right? They know more than the parents now because they have 20 years of life under their belt, right? We've all been those jerks. Let's just be honest. I know. When I had a couple years of university under my belt, I would go home, and here's what I would do. I had the best advice from my parents. I was like, oh, here's how you do that, Mom and Dad. And they'd kind of look at me and be like, really? Really? And you didn't even have to ask me anymore. I would just like, here you go. Hey, I noticed you have a checkbook. Here, let me fix that. Let me tell you how you can make more money. They're like, really? Because I just paid your college tuition? When you go home, you've experienced some awareness. There are some positive ways of sharing it, and there are some not so positive. You can be a sledgehammer, or you can be a silent person of wisdom. What will you be? Will you sledgehammer? Will you beat people over the head with what you've learned and how much more woke you are than them? Or will you sit and listen and wait for the questions to come to you? How will you do it? Israel has a moment, this new Christian movement in the first century, where they have this beautiful message, and the question, of course, is how are you going to share it? Will you go and demonize all Jewish people and Roman people? Because that's essentially what happened in 300 AD. They began to point to the Jews and say, you're the reason. You're evil. You killed Jesus. And that still is played out today. They started to demonize one another. The Christ message was love one another, find commonality, eat together, right? Forgive, find a way to live together. What will you do with it when you go home? How will you share this awareness you've had with people after you've had time to reflect? What do you do with it? Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, Chad, I just want to share something real quick.
Hit me.
Just to make it real.
I love it. Let's give him a hand. That's not easy to share. Thank you. Beautiful. And I love that you didn't just take off. You didn't just say, done, never come back. You did. Yeah, and that's another thing I want to say. Yeah. And isn't that cool that Donovan's willing to admit that it's a constant struggle, it's a constant movement, it's a constant dying to old, continue moving in that path, and it's just like it's a cycle. But you're willing to say, I'm growing, I'm learning, I really screwed up this time. What did I do wrong? Interestingly enough, and I hope I'm saying this right, I could be really embarrassing myself, but I'm pretty good at that anyways. The women's group is reading this book, and I think all the other ladies who are married have been like saying to their husbands, will you read this book? And we're like, yeah, I haven't read it. I was talking to Joe, I don't think you've read it. Tell me you haven't read it. You've not read it. Okay, good, you haven't read it. Donovan is reading it, right? Jeez.
If any guys want to get together in my place and read it,
We don't. But we'll hang out together. I'm kidding. No, it actually sounds like a really good book. The Passionate Marriage, right? All right. Is that the sex chapter? It's got like diagrams and pictures. Oh, okay. The Passionate Marriage. Oh, that chapter is electric sex. Done. That's beautiful. Let me end with this. Let me finish so we can all go home, right? I don't know why I have those notes up there. Is there any way to delete those those notes? I don't know why they're. Oh, that's fine. It's good. I have a daughter, and I have a son. And Kason and Ashlyn are in some ways like the polar opposite. And you can see this played out in so many different ways for those two. Kason is Mr. Lovey-dovey. He's positive. He's the one that comes up and he's like, Daddy, I love you. I'm like, son. He just does like these beautiful things. He will, they might be arguing. They might be in conflict, those two. And he'll be like, Sissy, can I help you clean your room? And she's like, of course you can. She'll like take advantage of him. And so here's this like really sweet kid. And yeah, he does, like he finds ways to get in trouble too. And then there's my daughter who, so talented. Give her any kind of football, baseball, soccer ball, whatever. She's going to be amazing at it. Skateboarding is her thing. She's just so good at it. But there's also this part of her that like doesn't see it and gets really upset. And so they were at skateboarding camp this week, and Kason, he would get something that was kind of for his age, it's an awesome trick. He'd do a rail slide at 5 years old. And when he popped off the rail, he was doing this, yeah! And he has this funny dance where he shakes his booty. He'll like turn around and shake his booty. That's what he does. He's so funny. And so Kason, he's doing this dance. He's shaking his booty. He's dancing. He's so excited because he did the trick. And then there's my daughter, who is like the perfectionist. She does this trick, and she does something called a 5-0, where she puts the board up like this, and she goes on a rail, and she slides down. She's jumping off of little jumps. She's doing all these things. She would get it like 1 out of 5, which to the rest of us humans, we would think, that's pretty good. I feel pretty good about myself. But my daughter would just lose it sometimes. And she would say this phrase, and I'm trying to be quiet so they don't hear me. She would say, I suck. And Danielle and I, we dealt with that all week because we would go to the skate park and we'd watch her every day. And every single time she'd say, I suck, over and over again. And for me as a parent, it hurt. And I kept thinking, what did I do wrong? What am I doing wrong? I started to be like, yeah, I suck as a parent. And she just couldn't she couldn't see how great she is. And it was painful for me because I wanted to, I even sat with her. I was like, do you realize how amazing you are? I kept going through this with my daughter. She didn't see it. And so I'm talking to a couple friends this week. I'm talking to Keith and Bob and a couple others. And all of you had the same stinking response. It was such a good response. One of them said, yeah, where did she get that from? I was like, oh. And he said, why do you suppose she's unable to celebrate when she has these moments of like awareness or growth? Why do you suppose she can't celebrate, Tony? And it hit me that I'm not modeling it. I'm not modeling living a life of celebration. I'm not modeling living this moment where you awaken and you really fully walk in it. I'm really good at talking about it, but living it, like the rest of us, it's hard. And so in that moment, it hit me that I have a ways to go, and I need to begin to walk that road, not toward Emmaus, because that's an easy road. I need to turn around and start walking that road a little bit more fully, a little more honestly. And so I made a deal with myself that every time something positive takes place, I'm going to celebrate it. I might choose to do a case and booty dance, so get ready for it. I may choose to just go out and just celebrate with my friends. Whatever the thing is, I'm going to learn to turn and look at that road that was just traveled, that moment of awareness. I'm not going to go back to the safety of those other things that are familiar, but I'm going to begin turning and walking the road back to Jerusalem where it's uncomfortable, where in my mind, it's way harder to celebrate than it is to say, I suck. I'm going to learn for me to start walking it, celebrating it, living it fully. And here's the beauty about when you do this. Every time I've done this in my own path, I've found that I'm not alone. And that's the Christ path, isn't it? That's the story. When you turn and you move away from the comfortable, you've just created some space. And people will fill that space. The divine fills that space. And before you know it, you know you're not walking alone, and you have other people to celebrate it with. And here's what I love about what we're doing, is we've created that space and that open dialogue. And so learn to celebrate it together every single week, this road we're all on. It's such a beautiful journey. It is the road through Jerusalem, past Emmaus, back to Jerusalem. It's that circular path that we're all on, and it's such a beautiful journey, and I hope you can celebrate it with me and everyone else.